It was a night meant for celebration, but for Leo, the weight of his own anxiety hung like a heavy cloud over the newly furnished apartment. He glanced around at the sparkling decorations, carefully chosen to mark his first real step toward independence, and felt a pang of doubt. The housewarming party was full of the usual suspects: friends, colleagues, some neighbors he barely knew. But among them, one person occupied his every thought. Nathan, his boss, had been the constant source of Leo's internal conflict for months now. The two had worked together for over a year at the advertising agency, but their relationship had always stayed within professional bounds. Nathan was sharp, confident, and, without fail, the kind of man who commanded attention in any room. For Leo, the attraction was undeniable, though he kept it buried beneath the surface of polite smiles and neutral responses in meetings. The idea of betraying his professional boundaries was something Leo had sworn to avoid, but the line between admiration and something more had blurred more times than he cared to admit. As guests mingled and the music filled the air, Leo couldn't stop watching Nathan. He was charming as always, a presence that seemed to outshine everyone else in the room. Nathan had arrived early, offering to help set up, though his real contribution was the easy way he'd slipped into the role of being Leo's silent anchor, making sure everything was just right. His charm didn't go unnoticed, and Leo felt both grateful and frustrated. Grateful that Nathan was here, frustrated because he knew this dynamic, this chemistry between them, was dangerous. "You're quiet tonight," a friend remarked as she sidled up to Leo. He offered a half-smile, nodding along as she spoke, but his eyes kept drifting toward Nathan, who was holding court in the corner of the room, laughing with another group. There was something in the way Nathan's gaze moved over everyone, something calculating, yet warm, an intensity that Leo had never been able to shake. Nathan had always been polite to Leo, even kind at times, but Leo had learned long ago to read between the lines. There were moments, fleeting and brief, when Nathan's attention lingered a little too long, his words a little too careful. Leo wasn't naive enough to think Nathan didn't feel the same pull. But they were both professionals, and nothing had ever crossed the line. Not yet. As the evening wore on, Leo's unease grew. He kept excusing himself to check on drinks, pretending to make small talk, but his mind was fixed on Nathan. He could feel his heart race every time their eyes met. It was as if Nathan was aware of the tension but never acknowledged it, treating it like an unspoken agreement between them. They would both stay in their lanes, pretend it wasn't there, and go home. But when Leo entered his bedroom, looking for a quiet moment to catch his breath, the silence shattered. There, standing in the center of the room, was Nathan. Naked. Leo froze. The door clicked shut behind him, the noise somehow deafening in the quiet room. Nathan stood still, his expression unreadable. His eyes met Leo's, and for the first time, Leo saw a rawness in them that made his pulse quicken. The world outside, the party, the guests, all faded into the background. What stood before Leo was an inevitable truth. The boundaries between them, professional or personal, had just crumbled. Leo's breath caught in his throat, his pulse thrumming wildly in his ears. Nathan stood before him, fully exposed, his broad shoulders tense, but his gaze, those eyes, were locked onto Leo's with an intensity that made everything else in the room fade away. The weight of the silence was crushing, every second stretching into eternity. Leo's first instinct was to turn and run, to escape this uncharted territory that had suddenly become their reality. But his feet were frozen to the floor, and his mind raced in a whirl of confusion. How had this happened? Why was Nathan here like this? The answers didn't come, and before Leo could form a coherent thought, Nathan spoke. "Leo," Nathan's voice was low, almost hesitant. It sent a ripple of heat through Leo's body. "I didn't expect you to walk in." Leo didn't answer right away. He couldn't. The room felt suffocating, as if the air had thickened with every passing moment. The sound of laughter and music from the party downstairs felt distant now, like a world apart. All that mattered was the man standing before him, vulnerable and unguarded. "I'm sorry," Leo muttered, though he wasn't sure what he was apologizing for. For barging in? For seeing Nathan like this? Or perhaps for the way his body seemed to betray him, a rush of desire flooding him despite the chaos of his thoughts. Nathan's lips curved into a faint, almost rueful smile, and he took a step toward Leo. "It's not what you think." His words were steady, though his eyes flickered with something Leo couldn't quite place. Leo wanted to speak, to ask questions, so many questions. How long had Nathan been in his room? What was he doing here in this moment? But the words stuck in his throat, replaced by the weight of Nathan's presence. The proximity was unbearable. The silence stretched on, suffocating until Nathan spoke again, his voice now tinged with a hint of something raw, something Leo had never heard from him before. "I didn't mean for it to happen this way." Leo's chest tightened. He could feel his own heart pounding, each beat a reminder of how close they were, too close. He could see the flush of heat on Nathan's skin, the way his muscles tensed and relaxed with every breath. This wasn't the Nathan Leo knew, controlled, confident, always so assured. This Nathan was exposed, stripped not just of clothing but of every mask he usually wore. Leo's mind scrambled, his rationality fading as something else took its place. He had always told himself that this attraction to Nathan, was something he could control. But here, in the dim light of his bedroom, all his carefully constructed boundaries were falling apart. He couldn't ignore the pull anymore. The silence between them felt like an invitation. "I didn't plan this," Nathan continued, his voice barely above a whisper. "But you've always been so distant, Leo. And I couldn't stop myself." Leo's heart raced. "What are you saying?" His voice cracked despite his best efforts to sound composed. Nathan stepped closer, closing the distance between them, his eyes never leaving Leo's. "I'm saying that I've wanted to, for a long time." The words hit Leo like a jolt of electricity, every muscle in his body tensing in response. His mind screamed at him to stop, to pull away, to preserve the delicate balance they had kept for so long. But as Nathan's presence filled the space between them, Leo realized something. He didn't want to walk away. Not anymore. The tension snapped, and before Leo could stop himself, he reached out, his hand trembling slightly as it brushed against Nathan's arm. The touch was electric, sending a shiver through both of them. Nathan's breath hitched, and Leo's own pulse thundered in his ears. Neither of them spoke. They didn't need to. The moment was too far gone. Leo's hand hovered over Nathan's skin, trembling with the weight of the decision he was about to make. The tension between them crackled in the air, thick and suffocating, a force neither of them could deny. Every part of Leo screamed at him to stop. This was dangerous, reckless, a violation of every boundary they'd ever known. But the pull was irresistible, and in the silence of the room, the only sound that remained was the rapid beating of his heart. Nathan's breath was shallow, his eyes dark with unspoken desire. He didn't pull away. Instead, his gaze softened, a hint of something vulnerable creeping into his otherwise confident demeanor. Slowly, almost hesitantly, Nathan reached for Leo's wrist, guiding his hand down to the warm, smooth skin of his chest. The touch was gentle, but it ignited a fire inside Leo that he couldn't ignore. "I shouldn't want this," Leo whispered, his voice trembling with the admission. His mind was a chaotic swirl of guilt and longing, each feeling battling for control. "You're my boss, Nathan. This isn't right." Nathan's hand slid to the back of Leo's neck, pulling him closer, his lips mere inches from Leo's ear. "I know," he murmured, his breath hot against Leo's skin. "But that's what makes it impossible to stop." The words sent a shiver down Leo's spine. The professional distance they'd maintained for so long, the careful boundaries they'd both kept, everything about their relationship had been about control. And now, in this moment, it was all slipping away. Leo's body moved of its own accord, drawn to Nathan like a moth to a flame. His lips crashed against Nathan's, a desperate kiss that was both tender and frantic. For a moment, there was nothing but the heat of their mouths pressing together, the sensation of being caught between desire and the overwhelming need to push past everything they'd known. Nathan's hands were everywhere now, roaming over Leo's back, his chest, pulling him closer with an urgency that matched Leo's own. The physical connection between them was undeniable, a collision of years of unspoken attraction and longing. Leo's head spun as Nathan guided him back toward the bed, his breath ragged, his heart racing in time with Leo's. The moment they fell onto the bed, the world outside, everything about the party, the life they had built around their roles vanished. There was only the raw, unfiltered connection between them. Nathan's hands moved with a purpose, not forceful, but determined. He kissed Leo again, deeper this time, his tongue teasing at the edge of Leo's lips, urging him to give in. Leo responded, his body aching for more, for the release that had been so long in the making. It was a surrender, a quiet, unspoken agreement between them, a tacit understanding that this moment, this dangerous, reckless moment, was more than just a physical encounter. It was an acknowledgement of everything that had been held back for so long, a breaking of barriers that neither of them could ever have predicted. Leo's mind swirled, but it was too late. There was no turning back now. As Nathan's hands moved lower, Leo could feel the weight of his own guilt pressing down on him. But it didn't matter anymore. They were past the point of no return. And somewhere deep inside, Leo realized more, for the release that had been so long in the making. It was a surrender, a quiet, unspoken agreement between them, a tacit understanding that this moment, this dangerous, reckless moment, was more than just a physical encounter. It was an acknowledgement of everything that had been held back for so long, a breaking of barriers that neither of them could ever have predicted. Leo's mind swirled, but it was too late. There was no turning back now. As Nathan's hands moved lower, Leo could feel the weight of his own guilt pressing down on him. But it didn't matter anymore. They were past the point of no return. And somewhere deep inside, Leo realized he didn't want to stop. The bed creaked beneath them as they moved together, each touch more urgent than the last. Leo's mind raced, but his body was no longer his to control. The need for release, for the kind of connection he'd only dreamed about, drowned out every other thought. The world outside the party, the expectations, the boundaries that had once seemed so clear faded to nothing, leaving only the raw, undeniable reality between him and Nathan. Nathan's hands were on him, everywhere, urging him closer. Every kiss, every touch, only deepened the pull, like they were both caught in a current they couldn't escape. Leo responded, his body betraying the hesitation he still felt in his heart. Every motion, every kiss, only cemented the feeling that this moment, this reckless, impossible moment, was far more than just a physical release. Nathan paused, his chest heaving, his eyes searching Leo's face. There was no mask now, no carefully constructed facade. His expression was raw, open, vulnerable in a way Leo had never seen before. It was as if everything they had kept locked inside had finally been given room to breathe. "Are you sure?" Nathan's voice was rough, his hand cupping Leo's face, his thumb tracing the line of his jaw. Leo swallowed, his pulse racing in his throat. His mouth was dry, and his mind spun with guilt, with confusion, but beneath it all was the overwhelming truth of how badly he wanted this. How badly he wanted Nathan. "I don't know," Leo admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "But I can't stop. I don't want to." Nathan's lips curled into a faint smile, and without another word, he kissed Leo again. A kiss that was tender and fierce, full of everything they had both been holding back. It was more than just an escape. It was an acknowledgement of what had been simmering beneath the surface all along, an understanding that neither of them could deny. The night stretched on, and in that room, they both lost themselves. The world beyond the walls ceased to exist. There was no boss, no colleague, no party, only the heat between them, the shared breath, the shared surrender to something they hadn't known how to face until now. When the moment finally passed, they lay tangled together, the silence between them no longer suffocating but oddly comforting. Leo's mind was still a whirlwind, but for the first time that night he felt at peace. He could hear Nathan's steady breathing, feel the warmth of his body beside him, and for the first time in what felt like forever, Leo realized that the boundaries they had been so careful to protect had been broken, yes, but they hadn't been shattered. They were still there, somewhere between them, but they were different now, shifted, changed. And as the quiet of the room settled around them, Leo found himself wondering what came next. But for the moment he didn't need to know. For the first time, he allowed himself to simply be in this moment. With Nathan, the rest could wait.